Do pesticides pose a danger to children's health and development? Can pesticides interfere with children's ability to learn? Is there an alternative to chemical pest control? And are our laws sufficiently protective of young children in school?
Those are the questions that will be addressed in the following presentation. Southeast Louisiana, hot and humid in the summer, cold and humid in the winter. The perfect habitat for a wide variety of pests, from roaches and rats to fleas and ants. Also the perfect place to test innovative new approaches in controlling those pests. In 1992, several parents in Mandeville, Louisiana, became concerned about the possible adverse effects on the health of their children from long-term exposure to toxic chemical pesticides. This concern soon focused on the local public school system's practice of periodically spraying pesticides while school children were present. The parents began gathering information on the issue and put together a panel of experts to discuss pesticides at a special public forum. They then brought in consultants from Maryland and California to tell of ways to reduce the need for toxic chemicals. They were seeking a way of reducing our schools' dependence upon poison. Community Dynamics presents how concerned parents persuaded the St. Tammany Public School System to switch to the least toxic method of pest control. In the following program, we will talk with several individuals who were significantly involved in the reduction of chemical pesticides used in the public school system of St. Tammany Parish. Let us first look at the problem. The parents started with an informational forum at Mandeville High School in 1993. Experts from throughout southeast Louisiana questioned the appropriateness of using pesticides in schools. We begin with an introductory statement from that public forum made by Wayne Bruno with the Society for Environmental Education.
I'm a resident of Mandeville and the father of 2 children in the Mandeville public school system. I will be your moderator for this evening's forum. Before introducing our panel, I would like to give you some information on pesticides and their effects on children. The reason for this meeting is to discuss the safety of and educate us, the parents and guardians of our most prized possessions, our children. The children are the future of the world, and we have an obligation as parents and guardians to make it as safe a place to live and learn in as possible. We need to be ever cautious of the environment and what we do as individuals or groups that affect the environment that can harm our children. I would like to quote from an article, Children and Toxic Chemicals, by Dr. Beverly Pagan, research biochemist at Children's Hospital Medical Center, Oakland, California. Why are children more sensitive to toxic chemicals? Most parents have had the experience of watching in amazement as a small child consumes a meal that is almost equivalent in size to an adult's meal. Children eat more food, breathe more air, and drink more water per pound of body weight than an adult. Because a child expends more energy and because a child is growing, his or her requirements for food and oxygen are greater. Thus, the dose of toxics per pound of body weight is higher. This is one reason that children are more susceptible to environmental toxins found in food, air, or water than adults. Children are more susceptible to environmental toxins than adults because children are growing. More is required than just maintaining the status quo. Many toxins, particularly those that cause cancer, damage rapidly dividing cells more than they damage cells that are in a resting state. Children are also more susceptible to toxic chemicals than adults because some organ systems, particularly in the very young child, are immature. The child's immune system, the system that fights off disease, is immature for the first 2 years of life. A child exposed to a toxin affecting the immune system will have more ear infections, more colds, more pneumonia, and more flu. A child is more susceptible to environmental toxins because of lifestyle. A child is more likely to have intimate contact with contaminants in soil than an adult. The child plays in mud, splashes in the nearby creek, and inadvertently ingests a little dirt. Many chemicals, especially organic solvents and chlorinated pesticides that concentrate in the fat or absorb through the skin. Neurotoxins are chemicals that affect the brain and the nervous system. They cause symptoms such as severe headaches, dizziness, memory loss, clumsiness, vision and hearing problems, loss of balance and tingling or numbness in the hands and feet. In children, neurotoxins can cause learning problems at school, hyperactive behavior, and seizures. If exposure to neurotoxins continues long enough, permanent brain damage can result. Currently, government does not require testing for the specific neurotoxic effects of pesticides. Our aim tonight is to focus on a safe, effective, and less expensive alternative to the use of toxic pesticides and herbicides in our schools. This can be accomplished through an integrated pest management program, or IPM. Integrated pest management is the coordinated use of pest and environmental information with available pest control methods to prevent unacceptable levels of pest damage by the most economical means and with the least possible hazard to people, property, and the environment. The goal of the IPM approach is to manage pests and the environment so as to balance costs, benefits, human health, and environmental quality. IPM systems utilize a high quantity and quality of technical information on the pest and its interaction with the environment. Because IPM programs apply a holistic approach to pest management decision-making, they take advantage of all pest management options, including but not limited to the judicious use of pesticides. Despite its technical-sounding name, IPM principally relies on a combination of age-old common-sense practices. To understand IPM, you need to understand pest behavior. Pests require air, moisture, food, warmth, and shelter to survive. They seek habitats which provide these basic needs. Therefore, to prevent or control pest populations, you can create inhospitable environments by removing some of the basic elements pests need to survive or simply block their access into the building. When these methods fail, pests may be eliminated by mechanical, such as traps or chemical methods. Before the correct action can be taken, it is essential that you notice evidence of the pests and the habitat. IPM consists of first, inspecting and monitoring the site, second, deciding on your level of tolerance, third, applying IPM strategies, and fourth, evaluating the program's progress. This is a method that is endorsed by many groups, including the National PTA, the National Education Association, the American Cancer Society, the American Society of Pediatrics, the Texas State Legislature, all schools, and numerous school districts across the country.
Several St. Tammany parents then went to New Orleans to attend a presentation by Dr. Marion Moses of the Pesticide Education Center in California. That program was put together by a Mandeville parent and a group called Women for a Better Louisiana.
What is a pesticide? Well, basically, it's usually a chemical, but it can be other. There can be natural or synthetic materials or substances whose purpose is to kill or harm living things. That's the whole side, a biocide. They're biocidal. There's more of an outcome besides death. Now, one of the things we're going to talk about, it isn't one of these things you're either alive or you're dead. I mean, it certainly is with a pest. You're not going to be very happy if that pest isn't dead, and the chemical companies know that. And that's why they formulate these products in a way that can be not only harmful to the pest, but can be harmful to you.
The evidence was mounting, and it convinced school board members Robert Lehman, Calvin Campo, and Patty Young to propose a change in the pest control policies of the school system. It all began when a Mandeville area parent came to Patty Young to tell her about an incident that took place at Mandeville Elementary School.
She sought help to adopt and implement a policy which would eliminate the chemicals from the immediate area of the youngsters. And in fact, her story was her own child who was playing on in an area that had just very, very recently been sprayed. And so that's how we became, as a board, we became involved give me we need a policy for the safety of our children. I had, for years, my children, I have 3 children, 2 of them were so hypersensitive to the chemicals used for treating our house that they could not stay in the house the day that the chemicals were used, were sprayed. And I had not really, I guess I hadn't even thought that we were treating classrooms, because I noticed that they would come home with these rashes, but didn't relate it until we started, one of them became really ill, and we started working with the allergist, and we were dealing with environmental factors now, because we had eliminated just about all of the foods and all of the pollens, and now we're into what else is there that we can take care of. And I noticed the cycle that Christopher, on the days that the bug man would come to our house, Christopher would have an asthma attack. So when Ellen called, of course I tried to deal with it first as a board member, but then I chuckled and said, listen, you just don't know what button you've pushed, because it's something that, as a board member, you don't bring your personal issues to the table. But now, thank you, I have your issue to bring to the table, which is comfortable with my, it's compatible with my issue. My son couldn't go to, they would be out of school at least 2 days if they would have the asthma, and then you would have to do something, they'd have a rash too, then you'd have to do something a day or 2 just to make certain that they were now stable. And then I realized it was on that same monthly cycle that we were dealing with at the house, and so it just started kind of all coming together. And I don't remember what point of their career we moved over. He was in 7th, 8th grade, so it's probably somewhere in his high school. But then with the other 2 behind him, that I actually asked, "Do you spray the school? Is the school regularly sprayed?" And sure enough, we watched that. So we got to the point where his teachers knew he wasn't going to be in. Yeah, but it was interfering. You can't miss 2 or 3 days per month for of school, but he couldn't go to school either. He was the worst. I stopped having my house sprayed and started researching some of the more natural things, and just being a little bit more sensitive to prevention, which is really where when we talk about least toxic or integrated pest management, what we're talking about is preventing the problem, and then of course a tolerance. Food. It's food, and then that's what they're looking for. They're looking for food. If you can eliminate the food, so if you can eliminate their reward, they're just as smart as we are. They're not going to go where they don't get a reward. I was excited that we could take a sophisticated issue like integrated pest or least toxic pest management and translate it into a regional and then a statewide issue that could be understood and adopted. Is there a viable alternative? And then that's another important factor which made this process possible, because there were, at every turn, we were able to find an alternative for what we were. It wasn't immoral, it was amoral. No one had brought that, to my knowledge, no one had brought that issue forward. I thought I was dealing with 3 children who were particularly unique. I'd not heard other parents complain about, and I don't, you don't advocate just for your child, especially not when you're sitting on a public board. You don't bring issues like that forward. And we were managing it with lessons at home and information to the teacher. We could find a solution. We could find an alternative. And the I guess exciting part for me was that we saved so much money. I mean, not only was it safer and more user-friendly, it was also financially.
For the system.
For the system. We're at 50% of our pest control budget now. Gee, that's the best of both worlds, because you're treating infestation or occurrences. You have to have reports. I mean, you don't have your pest control contractor there all day, every day. He relies heavily on sightings and reports to him, and that information, that communication getting to him, and then he goes in and he takes care of it. Now, there's some things that we do as a prevention as a matter of course, but other than that, it's an as-needed treatment. I think that's what we're going to have to look at as a society, is that the accumulated effect of all of everything, we talk about, gee, we never had allergies like this before. Well, we didn't have all of the contributing factors that, maybe we could tolerate goldenrod, and we could tolerate goldenrod with car emissions, but maybe when we start throwing in some of these pest control chemicals, and it just starts getting to be so much that our natural resistance isn't there for it. So that's what we're really talking about, I think, is pest control by itself, even in the most traditional form, maybe wouldn't have caused a problem for anybody from a health perspective. But when you add all these other factors into the pest control chemical, you have a problem which gets to be a little bit larger than it would otherwise have been. I'm really concerned about unborn children. What is the long-term genetic issue here that we're looking at? I guess, too, we saw if you could kill one roach, if this chemical will kill one roach, well, let's have a chemical that will kill 3, even if we only have 1. We've got something here that causes an organism to die. Can you give me enough of it to cause me to die? And you've got to believe it can. I mean, some of the chemicals work on the respiratory system. Well, if it's going to work on the respiratory system of a cockroach, I've got to ask myself, is it going to work on my respiratory system? And I always come up with the answer, could be. It was a safety issue. It was not a chemical issue. We said, let's protect, we're just doing it for kids. And also was the method that we used. We didn't do around the parish, all the schools. We did pilot sites, and we did pilot sites with site administrators who were amenable to the test. That was important. We knew we had parent groups and faculty groups at those schools that were willing to take the risk, to try something. And Ellen got the administrators at central office on board. It was a much less expensive method to use. And then we also had a contractor who worked with the sites, the first sites that were chosen, and went in with a team attitude, which is very important. This was one of the few issues that I could really put my finger on, where everyone worked as a team. We've talked all about kids, but kids come and go. Those faculty members are in those classrooms for, before the children, while the children are at recess, and after the children. And they're in the same classroom year after year after year. So if you're talking about a residual effect, these kids might go from one classroom that has a high level of chemical to one classroom that has a low level of chemical because the teacher doesn't allow them to eat in there, so there's not as much for. So, but the teacher is there all the time. So we're talking about benefits to the adult population in the school as well as the student population in the school. I recommend a pilot because it's a change, and you need our program is successful in great part to the fact that we managed the change. It was a buy-in process. The principals of the schools were the biggest advocates. And after several months, Dr. Winchell didn't have to do a thing. The principals themselves and the faculties members were talking about the positive effect, as was central office. Not positive effect, but the fact that we're doing as much or more with less, and that just appeals to all of us. Just prevention. It's because that's what we've only talked about the chemicals, but let's talk about what else it is. It is distributing memos to faculty saying keep and support staff saying let's keep all of our food products in the lounge area, in the kitchen area. It is sealing up cracks. It is various preventative techniques as well as killing the bug after it gets there. So even the prevention alone even is worthwhile. I was invited to speak in January this year at the Pest Control Association certification meeting, and several people cautioned me about going and walking into the lion's den. I want you to know that the pest control providers themselves are very interested in this. I mean, these guys, you know, if I'm going to purport that there is a possible negative side effect of chemicals, and these guys live with it day in and day out, I think that they see too that if there's a better way, easier way, cleaner way to do it, let's go ahead. They were extremely open to the information and to our story. It was a good learning experience for me also because these guys were interested in finding any better way to do it. We're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. Everyone was far more receptive to the concept. It just made sense. It made sense to everybody. And I would think any public body, any house, any private industry would want to at least explore this option. And then to anyone out there who's interested in seeing that exploration, to not be afraid. From my personal experience, if the exterminator didn't come to the house, the children didn't have the asthma, they didn't have the rash. It didn't take 3 or 4 months for it to get out of the house. And they went to school for 3 days. Mine were lucky, I think, that they manifested such gross symptoms. Let's talk about the kids who sit in school, and what we do know is the chemicals cause headaches. I mean, that's not even a question. All right, and so these guys are going to sit in school, and if you got a low-grade headache or a headache, you can't learn. You can't concentrate. Let's say you have some of the other youngsters had a lower level asthma attack than my boy did. Well, you're having a little bit difficulty breathing, you're not oxygenating your blood, you're not thinking fully. So I was lucky that I had these youngsters, I guess, who were so grossly affected by it, where I kept them home, got their lessons. They got 100% of their lessons at home. But we have this whole other element of children in the classroom who may be getting 50% because they're 50% sick.
But while the parents were beginning to question the wisdom of regular pesticide use in the classroom, something happened that indicated an even more alarming problem: the misapplication of pesticides. Within a short time period, 3 incidents took place in the state that indicated a serious problem in the way some workers were routinely applying toxic chemicals in a manner inconsistent with their labeling. Parents and concerned environmentalists in Baton Rouge captured a video of pesticide applicators fogging a school playground in Baton Rouge with the children running in and out of the fog. In Pierre Park, a small town in southern Louisiana, workers misused the pesticide Lindane with disastrous consequences.
school board, their custodians were doing the work themselves. They didn't have a professional that came in from the outside, and they had a flea problem in 2 schools. And exterminator in the area broke the law and sold the custodians some lending. The first thing he broke the law, my understanding is that he probably wasn't licensed to sell chemicals to start with, but it was unlabeled. It was put in a container without a label, which is strictly a violation of state and federal law.
Now let me ask you this question. This was school board employees who applied the chemical?
Yes, it was the custodian.
And they obtained it from a pest control operator?
From a reliable pest control company.
Okay. And what happened?
And what happened was that he went in and I don't know why he wound up spraying them as much as he did, but they had a flea problem. And he sprayed the classrooms, some portables, sprayed the playground. Some parents got hold of what happened, and I don't know exactly how it hit the publicity that it did in a hurry, but anyway, the school stayed shut down for over 9 months. They closed the school.
I believe some children had a reaction to it.
I heard that some of them did have some type of a reaction because, you know, lindane is not a chemical that you would use in a school. It's not a chemical that I'd use around my house. But what happened was that when Mr. Oldham and the Department of Agriculture went in, they found traces throughout the school. So what they did, they took all the floor covering up in the school. They cut the bottom 3 or 4 feet of the sheetrock or paneling or whatever was in out. They dug the playground up, resided the playground, put new soil. My understanding is one of the schools had a shell parking lot. They dug that up, put clay in it, and cemented it over. Last I heard, it had a few months ago I heard it had cost $1.6 million up to then. And I'm sure that it has probably gone more than that now. Plus, I think they got probably over 100 lawsuits pending. And that's how you can get in trouble in a hurry with chemicals.
But then in Mandeville, an incident that brought the message home took place at a city park for toddlers. Kelly Gonzalez, a mother who visited the park regularly with her children, tells what happened.
Well, that particular afternoon, the park was quite full in the toddler area. In fact, there was an infant in a baby seat sitting close to the trees while the other toddlers were playing and the mothers were talking. And one of the park workers came in, and he had a bag with him, and he was walking around the trees and around the playground area, which is a small, concentrated little area for the toddlers. It's enclosed. And he was sprinkling these granules all around the trees. And there was probably at least a half a dozen to a dozen children there that afternoon. And as he was walking around, he's sprinkling all around the trees, and no one was really paying much attention to him. And it started to smell a little bit, and it caught my eye. And that day happened to be a little breezy outside. And I went up and asked him what it is that he was doing. He said, "Oh, you know, don't worry, it's no concern of yours. And I was just taking care of some of the pests that we have around the playground area, and you know, not to worry about it." And as he started to walk away, I asked him, you know, "Well, would you mind showing me what it is that you're sprinkling?" And he kind of flashed the bag to me quickly, and I looked at it, and it said diazinon. And on the back, and you know, you could see it says, "Keep out of reach of children." I don't necessarily blame the park worker. I think that he probably didn't have knowledge as to what this pesticide, what the danger is of this pesticide around infants and children, and also adults.
Now you say this was granules. Were they visible on the ground?
Yes, they were, and they can also become airborne.
Oh.
Which alarmed me. At the time, I knew it was something dangerous. I didn't exactly know how dangerous it was, but I told everyone, this man is sprinkling some kind of pesticide. I think it would be a good idea if we, got the children out of this area, because this did become airborne, and it was starting to smell. And there was, I'd say at least maybe a couple of children that were complaining their throat hurt a little bit.
And did you think that was a result of the...
Yes, I do. I believe that it very, I don't see any other reason why all of a sudden their throat would kind of start to hurt a little bit, after being out there playing outside. Everyone left the playground, and I then went home, and I called a group that I was introduced to called NCAMP, and they were very helpful to me because they then looked up the diazinon. They also faxed me some information and told me exactly what it is that this man was sprinkling.
So you called this organization, and what did they tell you? Were they alarmed by this?
Yes, they were very alarmed. They were very upset by it. They said it was a very smart thing for all of us to leave the area, especially since it was granulars, because they do become airborne. I called Public Works, and I told them about it, and I was very upset about it. And other mothers called also and expressed their concern and how upset they were. And they then told us that they would not be using it again, and they were very sorry for what had happened. And NCAM also spoke to them and told them the dangers of using a pesticide like that around small children in a playground area. And I think it's just lack of knowledge. They really didn't know.
So what did the city do? Did they close the park for...
They closed the park.
The park was closed for 2 days until after a heavy rain.
In your case, you sort of noticed what was going on in the toddlers park and took immediate action. What would you recommend to other parents who perhaps see something going on, they don't quite know what's happening? What would you recommend that they do? Just
ask questions.
Ask questions of the person applying the...
And they might not necessarily know, but I did ask the man, can I just look at the bag for a minute? And I think he knew that it wasn't a good idea to be using this, but I don't necessarily blame him. I think he probably just really wasn't sure of what the effect was, that he was just doing his job.
The parents eventually concluded that it was definitely time to reduce pesticide use in the public schools, but they wanted to offer an alternative method of pest control to take its place, a less toxic method of pest control. They brought in consultant William Forbes of Maryland, who had designed and implemented the IPM system for the Montgomery County public school system and numerous others across the country.
Talking about integrated pest management for a lot of you, or for some of you who are in the industry of managing pests, this has become a buzzword. It's become a very rather generic term, so I like to refer to it as intelligent pest management as opposed to integrated pest management, because it seems like everybody has their own slant on what integrated pest management is all about. So we'll look at the intelligent aspect of managing pests. A lot of times when I go out to a site to look at pest problems, the first thing the person at the site wants to know is whether or not I'm going to use the big bomb, or whether I'm going to use the pump spray can or something like that to take care of the problem. And when I first arrive on a job site, I normally take a flashlight and clipboard so I can take notes as to what's going on within that facility. And normally there's a perception that I will use the big bomb or the silver can as an initial point of contact in order to manage pests. Very oftentimes it does not take that type of an approach in order to manage all types of different pests that you may encounter, whether it be in the area of the country that I live in or whether it be here in Louisiana. And this just typifies an older structure where the kindergarten teacher has saved all of this stuff and packed it all inside this cabinet, and then she asked me to get rid of a cockroach problem that she has essentially created on her own, because she's allowed for so much garbage to pile up inside that cabinet. There's nothing that I can legitimately do short of placing bait pucks inside that cabinet. Now that in itself
is not sufficient in taking care of the problem. The problem is more broad spectrum than just placing baits inside that cabin. So I need this person to be able to work with me and separate the wheat from the chaff. We found a warning poster for fallout from a nuclear attack. It was dated 1956. It was tacked up on the wall. So it seems to me as though she's a little behind the times. And when we started pulling some of this garbage out, she had newspapers she had saved for paper mache that were dated back when in 1964. So there's a lot that can be done as far as removing a lot of that old material. She's never going to use it. Never going to use it. And start pulling that stuff out and changing her storage practices.
Dr. Ellen Winchell, another Mandeville area parent, helped focus attention on the need to try an IPM pilot project at several of the public schools to see how it would work here in Louisiana.
The IPM pilot project was designed to show that we could have a system that was less expensive, more effective, and safer for children. We were trying to show that we were not going to be overrun with bugs if we withdrew the use of chemicals from our pest control program, and we were trying to show that we would not incur undue expense. We chose two schools, one an older school that had numerous problems, and one a relatively newer school. It was about 30 years old, but relatively new, that did not have as many problems. And the pest control contractor really did not expect it to work. It did work in both schools, which led him to become enthusiastic and led us to go on to expand the program to the entire parish.
If parents were interested in starting some sort of IPM program in their public schools and were kind of considering at a pilot program, what would you recommend that they do? Any books that they can turn to or any organizations they can call?
Yes, the Unified School District of San Diego was one of the pioneers in the IPM programs in schools. They have an entire manual that they publish, which you can purchase for a minimal amount of money, which shows exactly how to go about this. And since that time, numerous school districts across the country and several states have in fact mandated IPM, so there are many examples both in the south and the north, east and west, so you could choose your region and your pest type to call and get advice.
Laura Allams, principal of the school where one of the pilot programs were implemented to test the integrated pest management system of pest control.
My interpretation is that we are going to use means other than chemicals to control these visitors that we have in our schools and all over, you know, any business, home, or any other place is going to have unwanted visitors. And we started 3 or 4 years ago. I had a parent in my school who had done a lot of research and study in this area, and she objected to the use of chemicals in the school and talked to me about it and talked to I referred her to Mr. Fairley. And she had a daughter in the school who reacted to some of the chemicals. And when it first happened, her daughter's classroom was invaded by an army of ants. And so when the mother found out that we used normal procedure, which was to go out and spray with the chemical to remove the ants, she came and said she had other means of doing it. So she came out with some form of a trap for us to use. And you know, we were skeptical. And we said, okay, but we'll try it. We were skeptical. Then we had some bee problems. And she told us about houses, bee houses that you could order and put a sweetener in there and they would attract the bees. Still, we were skeptical and referred her again to Mr. Fairley. And over the course of that year, with a lot of study, the school board said that they would use this school as a test pilot site to see if the integrated pest management would work. So what I understand was, rather than using sprays, we had glue boards, and a big thing was to get rid of the source in the first place. So to close off, seal crevices, seal cracks, make sure the school is clean. So between the custodians, convincing them that we don't have to use chemicals to control, keeping a clean school, which they're very good at. I mean, they really are. We have a clean school. And all of us working to clean up behind ourselves and control that sort of thing. It worked. And last spring, I had an infestation of ants in the flower bed around the flagpole.
Mm-hmm.
The children wanted to plant some flowers, and I couldn't let them do it because the ants were so bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I called Ellen, and she said, yes, I know of something. She said, I did it at my house 2 years ago. I had ants in the yard. And you can get mites that you put down in the ground.
The biological agents used to get rid of the ants were actually nematodes.
The mites eat the ants and the ant eggs, and it totally eliminates that problem. All right, okay, we'll try this one too. Your others work, we'll try this one too. So our contractor came out. He did the mites.
Mm-hmm.
This was last spring, and we have no ants in that bed whatsoever. And my test was this fall. We wanted to plant some flowers, so I sent the custodian out because I wanted to make sure before the kids went out there. Sure enough, there are no ants in that. I mean, and it was overrun with ants before. So
and they're tough to get rid of.
Yes, they're very tough. And she says that she did hers 2 years ago and hasn't had an ant in her yard since. So I'm so convinced that my husband and I are having this same thing done at our house.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to go to the integrated pest management rather than our spraying and our chemical use. I personally react when chemicals are used. In the past, when the bug man was coming, as I called it,
mm-hmm.
I would have to get out and stay out because it would aggravate my allergies. Right.
Yes.
And one of the things that they do that I like is if we have a problem, we only address that area. We don't have to come in and do the whole school.
Mm-hmm.
If it's not broken, we don't try to fix it. We go to the area where the problem is, and that's what we address. We look to see if there are any more cracks or if there are crevices. Are we collecting water in that area? That sort of thing. So I would definitely recommend this program just based on it works. The older the school, the harder it's going to be to do. This school is 30 years old, and we've managed to do it. Hard work and wanting to do it.
Closing.
And changing the way you think about things and changing the way you do things. But if it's what's going to be best for children in the long run, then that's what we need to do. And anytime we can eliminate chemicals, it's better for all of us, and particularly for them. And I think it's going to take all of us working together. We place a lot of emphasis here at the school on the environment, saving the environment, protecting the environment. Every little thing that we can do is going to help. As far as I know, we are not spraying in this school. I haven't really interviewed our current person to find out. I haven't seen him spraying anything.
What about the time period regarding, I think you have to keep people out of the building for several hours?
Yes.
Is that inconvenient?
No, we have an after-school program that ends at 6. And so after 6 o'clock, the only people who are here are the custodians. So his time is to come between 6 and 7. And he waits till there are no children in the building before he sprays. And then it's 12 hours because our school doesn't start until 7 o'clock the next morning with child care.
So it's not.
So it's the 12-hour. No, it's not inconvenient at all.
Safe.
If there's another way, why not do it?
Right, exactly.
So that's my philosophy.
And apparently it saves money.
Yes, that's the big plus out of all of it. And we were all skeptical because we thought it would cost more.
Great.
And that means that that's that money that we can put into materials and supplies for the children.
The pilot projects proved that IPM was effective in handling the pest problem, and it did not increase the cost of providing pest control in the schools. As a result, the school board decided to implement the less toxic method of pest control in the public schools throughout the rest of St. Tammany the following year. Simi Fairley, supervisor of administration for the public school system, oversaw the implementation of IPM parish-wide. We asked Mr. Fairley what the main aim of the current pest control contractor was.
He certainly set a goal to get the parish as close to being free of chemicals, and he's just about reached that. He feels comfortable with what he's done up to this point, and we feel the same way. And we have our principals feel the same way, and parents. We have individuals out there who express the same concern, same feelings.
Was there anything that you would be doing differently, or that you would have done differently if, now that you're looking back at it?
Well, there's we call it the educational part of it, and that is informing staff a little bit more. You would have to really do that more in the beginning, parents in the beginning, as to what you're doing, what the program is all about. And we're in the process now of doing a little bit more of that.
Okay.
I think that's the key to a good IPM program. Getting everybody, all the players, to understand what the program is about. Now, the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, they are now pushing very hard across the state for everyone to really have an IPM program. As a matter of fact, we now get communication from them. And this communication simply states that you've got to send in your IPM program, everybody across this state now. And not only sending it in, but you must keep records. You're going to have a very good record-keeping program as to applications, whatever chemicals you're using, how you're treating whatever pests you're treating.
And the timing is a factor too. Once the treatment is made, students can't come back in until, what, 8 hours or 9 hours?
12 hours.
12 hours.
Now, we have hours of 12 hours. The state, though, that requirement is 8 hours, so we're really 4 hours.
Okay. That had to cause some difficulties when you first set up that little schedule.
It did initially, and sometimes now. There's some little things that you got to work out, especially with your high schools and with activities that we have going on the campus. It's making some, you have different times you got to coordinate some things in order to follow you, to be in compliance with your 12 hours.
If someone was to call you, say from out of state, and ask you, what about this IPM thing? What are y'all telling them nowadays, overall?
Well, I'm telling them that there are some key things you got to have. Some programs are done in-house where you got employees, but we are fortunate in that we were able to contract someone who, he has knowledge and was willing to work. That's one key thing. You can get a pesticide company and someone who's really concerned and want to really get that program implemented. That's a big plus for you. And so I would tell them, go with the contract part. In-house, if you got someone in-house, it creates, I would think, a little bit more. Because those people got to be licensed, and you got a lot of other things you got to come under.
Certain liabilities there when you do it in-house.
And the educational phase of it. Informing, like I say, initially, if we had to go back and start again, we probably would start really trying to inform parents and students, and teachers, and everyone employed more about what we were trying to do. You provide food and water, which is what pests got to have, then you're certainly going to have infestation. But I think certainly Mr. Tanner hit the nail on the head. We have mice. That's one of the things that, when you have the mice, that's what they're after. Soon we remove those type things, we begin to get that under control. And it's, IPM, when we define it, you're talking about some kind of level of tolerance. You have a situation to occur, and then you address it. There's going to be things that's going to happen, and then you address that. So infestations, when they occur, you take over. Our pesticide man, he'll come in, and what he'll do, if he notices there are holes, there are cracks, he tells us and tell me, and I in turn get maintenance to go in and seal off those areas. We've had tiles where mice would eat a hole in the tile and come down in the closets after something. Had to just go in, just something of replacing the tile. That stops it and removing the food. So it's those kind of things.
What's the sequence of events when a teacher sees a roach? Who does she call? Who does she talk to? What happens when?
She would probably report it to the principal or to the custodian. Could happen that way, or to whoever's in charge of the program at the schools. If it's an assistant principal there, sometimes they report it to that person. But it's very seldom. We don't have any roach problem now in the classroom as such.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's something that I just don't get any calls on. You're gonna have, we get calls on maybe roaches in cafeterias, in the teacher's lounge, for the most part. But I think the big thing we have right now is ants. Ants, brown ants.
Inside and
outside. They work their way in, and they're after sweets and things like that.
Sure.
Children bring their lunch boxes to school. With the present contractor that we have, he started 3 years ago, so at this period of time, this gentleman, there's a lot of glue boards and sticky traps that he's sprayed it throughout this parish. And he does, and that is a key thing of moving, going around, monitoring those things, and he spends a lot of time. That's time consuming, just going in and checking them. Traps for mice, fresh bait, and all this kind of stuff. But there's a number of those type of traps that's been set up.
Do you find generally that wasps and bees are a result of maybe some garbage that's been laying around, or cans, soda cans?
Sure, that's and I get this feedback from the pesticide contractor when I contact him to go and at a school to call in about bees or what have you, and he'll tell me, I found cans, drink cans, and sweets in the trash can, and that's what they were after. So I get the feedback as to what they were after for the most part, especially bees.
Now you had mentioned about ants being a problem. What do you do about ants? I know there's poison. There's a way to poison them, and there's also some kind of new way, some kind of nematodes, I believe.
Yeah, there is a biological way that you can treat them. We, at the present time, he's doing a pilot program at one of our schools. It's kind of an expensive way of treating them, so we're doing a pilot with that. But for the most part, he's treating it the regular way of using some type of treatment, some type of application for them. But if this pilot program is successful, then we'll talk about maybe that being a biological way of treating them.
What about termites? Have y'all looked at termite treatment?
Well, termites is still being treated not by the contractor that we have. We just we get quotes with the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Part of that program, when you submit your IPM program, that program is then submitted to all of our schools so that they are aware of what we've sent into the Department of Agriculture and Forestry. But also, it states in there, they have to have on file any child that they have received a doctor's statement from that says that child cannot be exposed, that they're very sensitive to chemicals. It's got to have that list. They got to have that on file. Yeah, we feel that we've been successful up to this point, and we're still in the learning phase, looking for ways to improve our IPM program, and we feel that we will.
An early skeptic of the IPM system of pest control was Richard Tanner, Assistant Superintendent of Schools. However, as the effectiveness of the least toxic method became evident, and as the cost of implementing it proved to be below what was being spent with chemicals, he came to understand its benefits.
Yeah, I had a lot of reservations, but the fact that we just didn't go totally into the program, you know, in the beginning, because I was skeptical that it was going to cost us a lot of money to do. Field cracks,
first year stuff.
Yeah, first year stuff and what have you. And we went at it slowly and what have you, and so it didn't, you know, it wasn't a big cost factor.
One of the things that you were hoping to do was save money in the long run by going to this. You have.
And we have.
All right. How would you characterize that savings? Slight, substantial, worthwhile?
It would be a slight savings.
Yeah, it's not a, you know, we wasn't spending a lot of money on pest control. Our contract was around $30,000 or so.
Right.
And
that's what I remember.
Yeah, so, I mean, we saved $15,000. I mean, it's not a great deal, but the big savings is the fact that we don't have the chemicals, you know, on the campuses and what have you. And two, even if you could have them there, it's, you know, the health effect is, you know, it's not, we don't have that possibility of it using, you know, causing child's illness.
I know some parents were concerned about that, and that's something y'all wanted to address because of that.
Well, that's, you know, that's the key to the whole thing is the fact that, you know, they just didn't want the children exposed to the chemicals. The educational part, we've had some problems in particular schools and what have you with pests and what have you, and when we go there we find a lot of food and what have you in the teacher's classroom and this type of stuff, and this is the type of thing that you need to educate your employees on, is to, you know, not provide the stuff that attracts the bugs and stuff into the particular classrooms. We didn't have a lot of problem in our cafeterias to start with because of the fact that they keep them so clean and what have you. But you still have to, you know, maintain the door jambs and the cracks and what have you to make sure that the pests don't get in. And of course, your problems with cafeterias is when you get deliveries of commodities and canned goods and what have you in boxes and what have you, they bring in the infestations.
So you say your principals are pretty well happy with the system now, basically?
I don't ever get a complaint anymore from schools about pest control.
What about your custodians and maintenance people? Are they in the groove now as far as what to do and what not to do?
Yeah, we have a hard time, not a hard time, but that's an educational process too. Not only with the pest, but you know, we've through policy we don't allow the use of herbicides and what have you for controlling grass and weeds and those types of things either. So it's, you know, Roundup and those kinds of things are real easy to spray on fence rows rather than doing, you know, using a weed eater and what have you. So we have to follow up on that sometimes. And,
sort of a habit, breaking habits.
Right. well, I mean, they can do that one time at the beginning of the summer. They don't have to go back and weed eat all summer, you see.
That's true.
And then wasp, hornets, those types of things. We don't let them control those kinds of things. Our contractor handles those situations and what have you. Sometimes it becomes necessary that we control those things while kids are there and what have you, and for the protection of the children. But in most cases, we try to do that on the 12-hour schedule so that the students are not there and what have you. We've not moved into, the IPM deal on treatment of termites. We still treating termites the same way we've always treated termites and what have you. But that's one of the things that we're going to look into.
Sort of phasing it in over several years.
Yeah, this is, like I said, we didn't know a whole lot about this when we got started either, and of course Mr. Fairley, has learned a lot about it and has worked with it. But and I think probably, we started off doing the program without a lot of education. This year we're gonna try to do a lot of education to our employees and what have you, so that they'll know what we're doing. And we also want to look into further things like termites and what have you. And this was a law passed through the legislature that was designed around our program. My suggestion to anybody that would consider going into it, I would certainly recommend that they use a form of integrated pest management. But in order to do it, you have to be committed to it. It's not something that you can say, well, tomorrow I'm going to do integrated pest management. It's something that you work into, but you have to make the commitment that you're going to do it. And like I say, we were somewhat resistant when it first started, but as we got educated, we realized that this is something that we needed to be doing. We have a commitment to it now, and hopefully we're going to have, a completely integrated pest management program when we get, through implementing. It's not the easiest method, but it's the common sense method of it's the same method that you would use it in your home, probably, because you're not going to just spray chemicals all over your house when you have to be there and live in it. And why would you do that in a school system where kids and teachers and employees are going to have to be there and live in it? So yes, it gives the same results without exposing anybody to hazardous material.
St. Tammany's success with IPM prompted State Representative Eddie Dino to introduce legislation to mandate that schools throughout the state implement some form of IPM, along with better record keeping of which pesticides were used and more precautions about when they were used.
I was contacted by a group of citizens that were basically a coalition of constituencies in St. Tammany Parish. Some governmental groups like the League of Women Voters. There were also a group of parents. There were also environmental groups that had all were aware and had come together in my district of the need for reducing the use of toxic chemicals in schools, and actually had done a lot of the legwork with our local school board.
So was the local program up and running at that point?
Yeah, the local program had been implemented. I don't recall whether we had gotten some sort of state allowance to do a pilot program and then moved on to a statewide program. I believe that we had a permission to do a pilot program in St. Tammany Parish, which had been achieved a year or so before. The people that were involved were very knowledgeable, my constituents that were involved with it. They had traveled around the country. They had talked to people that had already implemented it. They had figures dealing with long-term economy of this type of treatment of pests in schools.
Mm-hmm.
They had done their homework.
Was some of this information new to you, surprising to you?
Yeah, you know, when you're in the legislature and there's issues dealing with everything from crime to fiscal policy and in the environment and education, the idea of the importance of limiting the use of pesticides in schools doesn't present itself every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pleased that my constituents I was proud of my constituents. They were on the cutting edge of what was going on in this area in the state.
Describe to us the sequence of events from your standpoint. Did you introduce a bill, get it through committee and things like that? Public hearings were held?
Well, we began to do some negotiations and make rumblings that we would be introducing this sort of legislation, and it piqued the ears of the chemical companies and other people that may not be interested in having these laws implemented. And it's important to know that when you do these types of things legislatively, Ron, that there are many interests that are involved. And for instance, the School Board Association was not for this legislation. And they viewed it as a state government interfering with local education. And you know, there were issues that we needed to be sensitive to and take those types of things into account. But yes, and the chemical companies had their own legislation that was purportedly to do the same thing. In fact, my bill is not the bill that passed.
Oh, okay.
I heavily amended the bill that was put out by the chemical interests, and in the legislative process, and a lot of times those things happen. Actually, the bill that was proposed by the environmental community even was not the one that passed. Mm-hmm. The one that was proposed by the chemical interests passed, but in a form that we were very happy with. So it was a long legislative fight, a complicated legislative fight.
Sort of a compromise that balanced all the factors.
When we got into it, we were willing to accept the legitimate concerns of local school systems as to not feeling that they were being oppressed by the state. But we were not willing to compromise the unfettered use of chemicals at the drop of a hat and with our school children. Mm-hmm. We felt that the state had an interest to be sure that the school had been chemical-free for 8-12 hours before children came into the school. Mm-hmm. We felt that it was necessary that the state monitor the types of chemicals that are used in the schools, and also to make the policy that the least toxic method of taking care of pesticides, that we needed a statement that said for the children in their schools in Louisiana, we're going to use the least toxic method to effectively keep pests out of the schools. And a lot of times it's just common sense. You know, one of the things that we have to keep in mind when we're advocating these measures is that not everyone has the same view of pesticides and chemicals that we might have here in St. Tammany Parish or in a suburban area or in a let's say non-agricultural area. Sure. And that people from rural agricultural areas have a totally different view of pesticides and chemicals, and it's not to say that be judgmental about their views, because for many instances their livelihood, and they view their livelihood as being dependent on the use of chemicals. Where we have to weigh in is to show that we have to have responsible use of chemicals, that their viewpoint is not necessarily 100% correct, and accept that ours has to be in some regards modified for a broad use. I mean, for a broad state policy, we can't pull necessarily our perspective on it and say that this is the way that it has to be done. And we have to be sensitive. That's the trick to passing these bills.
One of the areas that were of most concern to the parents was the misuse or the misapplication of pesticides. Applicators not following directions.
Applicators untrained.
Right.
No one keeping tabs on what was being put in the schools. no one keeping tabs of when it was being put in the schools.
And this legislation addressed that.
Yes, and also stated that it is our policy that we use the least toxic method to rid the schools of pests. The feeling was that there are many types of dangers that can be put into the schools, and it doesn't make sense to present one danger to get rid of another one.
You say it was quite a complicated process getting the legislation passed, and a lot of people had different opinions. Was there a point there when pretty much everyone got on the same track and truly understood the goal of this school pesticide bill?
Really, it was a fight, and we could never get every interest involved to support the measure. There were some chemical interests that had a very strong feeling in support of our bill, because that it was in their interest to have trained, or they felt that it was important to have trained people applying the pesticides. And of course that's in their financial interest, because they train people to apply pesticides.
Mm-hmm.
So they want people that have been trained. The law requires people that are trained to do it, because that promotes business for them, rather than to allow somebody who isn't trained or isn't associated with some sort of business that does the application to do it. So that there are allies, there are natural allies for these types of measures in the chemical industry and in the pesticide industry. And what we were able to do was to bring all the possible forces to bear that would be in support of this measure: environmental, chemical, educators, parents, and we're able to pass the bill. But no, I don't believe the School Board Association ever supported the bill. I don't believe that the large chemical companies ever supported the bill. And it was a long, drawn-out legislative fight.
It wasn't as simple as you thought it might be at the beginning.
No, it really wasn't. It was not. The committee hearings were volatile. It was amazing that a measure like this could become so controversial.
Was there any grassroots support, petitions being delivered and things like that?
The League of Women Voters was very supportive. Our local parents were very supportive, and they networked to other school systems around the state. And those types of things helped. It worked out well.
Have you had any positive feedback from groups?
What the feedback that I get is that many of these groups are continuing their efforts. This was viewed as a first step. And of course, that's what the opponent said too. But they've honed their research. I expect that we will see more of this type of legislation in the future.
There's more research going on as
There's
well.
a lot more research going on. There's a lot more treatment methods for pests that don't involve chemicals. I think that probably when this area is looked back several years from now, it will be perceived as a door opened rather than an issue resolved. Any place where people are living and working and playing and whatever, that we need to keep that as safe from foreign influences as possible. And I consider pesticides, while they're certainly necessary in many instances, need to be understood that there's limitations to its use, and that it can be harmful if it's misused.
To help pass the state legislation, thousands of state residents signed petitions in favor of IPM, and dozens of environmental and citizens watchdog groups assisted in the effort. Paula Henderson with the Louisiana Citizen Action evaluates the outcome.
The St. Tammany IPM program has been very important here in the state. It has set an excellent example of what can be done with least toxic pest control, how effective it is. And it's a program which helped us go to the state capitol and get a good, strong state law which requires better regulation of how pesticides are used in the schools. So that program, as I said, has been a very important example, and other schools are looking to that as a model. Well, there's just a growing mountain of evidence about the serious health risks for children that are associated with a lot of the commonly used pesticides, which were frequently used in our schools. Many of these pesticides contain neurotoxins and other chemicals that have an impact on children's neurological development, which causes various behavior problems, not just long-term health effects, but short-term behavior problems like learning disorders and hyperactivity, which we see commonly in our school, but we weren't directly associating that or thinking about the effect that pesticides might have on that. As I said, there's also very serious long-term health effects. For example, they found that children who are exposed to pesticides in their homes and in their schools have 6 times higher rate of childhood leukemia. And that has certainly been, childhood cancer in Louisiana is certainly a problem here. It makes common sense that the toxicity in these pesticides has a lot longer life when it's used indoors, as in a school environment, for instance. They don't break down as they would when used outside. So children are repeatedly exposed to these chemicals in an indoor situation. We found that here in Louisiana, each school was kind of monitoring, if you can call it that, their own program. There was no record keeping of what was being used, or certainly inadequate records. Pesticides were being used by people who did not have proper training. They were used frequently and repeatedly in different classroom situations. So children were often coming into the classrooms before these chemicals were allowed a proper drying time, before they had time to break down adequately. So it was a very risky kind of situation. With the new law, we have better record keeping of what's being used and when. We have the means for notification of parents of children who might be particularly sensitive to these chemicals before they spray, and that's very important also. The new law requires for a much better training program for any applicators, so that you don't have just the school janitor or teachers going in there and spraying after each other, you know, so that you have a buildup of the chemicals. So this new law is going to be very important. And as I said, you know, the St. Tammany project, which has proved to be very effective, is the perfect model that we can take and show other schools how this can be done. Of course, important to the schools is the fact that the typical chemical use, the old approach, was very expensive. It cost the school system a lot of money to use these chemicals, and then we know that the chemicals become less and less effective. So you're using more of the pesticides and really not reducing the problem and increasing the toxic exposure for the children at the same time. So it just makes sense to go with the least toxic pest control approach. It's not as dangerous, it's just as effective, and it's much less expensive. Federal regulations do not require specific evaluation of these chemicals for many of these behavioral effects, which may be much more subtle. But there is a direct relationship to learning disorders, effects on hyperactivity, emotional behavior, as well as hearing and sight problems that we see every day in our classrooms here. And as I said, have not been directly associated, were not recognized as symptomatic of pesticide exposure, especially at low levels, and it goes on every day. It is a very large-scale problem, actually. We're not just talking about spraying for bugs in a classroom, because unfortunately our children get exposures to these high-risk chemicals in every bit of their environment. especially in our food and our water. So you have a compound effect. We need to keep in mind also that the federal health standards are based on exposure to these chemicals for an adult male. They don't take into consideration the special vulnerabilities of children, and they don't take into consideration the multiple exposure. You're not being exposed to one chemical at a time. You're getting it in the food you eat, the water, as well as your physical environment around you. Children have much higher levels of exposure to these chemicals, for instance, in our food and water, because they consume more fruits and vegetables. They drink about 8 times the adult consumption of water or liquids per their body weight. And children are just basically much more vulnerable to these chemicals because their bodies are not physiologically developed enough to detoxify these chemicals the way an adult does. A lot of their vital organs are rapidly developing at that stage, so toxic chemicals have a much more severe impact on their body and their neurological development at an early age. I think it's a matter of public education. As I said, there is growing evidence, which we never realized before or thought about, the health problems associated with these pesticides. When they first came on the market, we just thought, this was a great boon. It was going to take care of the problem. Years went by before we ever thought that there might be some health risk associated with it. DDT is a good example of how long that was used and how widely it was promoted. And then now, 30 years later, after that chemical was finally banned from the market, we're still finding evidence or traces of it in our soil, in our food. Some of these chemicals just don't go away. And it takes a long time for us to realize some of the health effects, the problems that are created. Because as I said, in many situations, it's very subtle. So it just makes common sense not to take any unnecessary risk, especially with our children. So the public does need to get the adequate information so that they will stop and think twice before relying on chemicals to control pest problems, when you can use a lot of common sense approaches, physical approaches like if it's in your home, sealing up the cracks, cleaning up the food, and the school situation is like a second home to our children. So, putting up screens, there's a lot of physical controls that you can rely on before you have to even think about putting chemicals into that environment. Getting the state law on school pesticides passed was a very valuable lesson for all of us who are trying to get some safer changes made for our children. This is happening all across the country, but as you said, it starts with that one concerned parent. And I would suggest that they talk to their school principal, that they talk with the PTA groups, that they talk with their neighbors, other parents of children that go to that school. There's a great deal of information out right now as far as the health effects of these schools. There's a great deal of information out as far as the health problems associated with these chemicals. Fortunately, there's also a great deal of information on how to organize to get some changes made. And it's all about increasing the public awareness and coming together and looking at some safer alternatives. That's why it's so important that our schools here in Louisiana get on board, get the information that is available as to what works. Least toxic pest control is something that has been shown to be effective. It's simple, it's economical, and it's a lot safer for our kids. And it's just a matter of the parents speaking up and making it clear that they want that approach used in their schools. There is an enormous increase in awareness and concern by the public. And that has got to be carried over into our government policies. It starts with the people, the voters, making some demands for better evaluation of these chemicals, talking to your elected officials, making sure that we have federal policies that set good, strict regulation of how these chemicals are used, how the chemicals are tested and evaluated. We are seeing a response from the EPA. One good thing that has recently happened is the Safe Drinking Water Act. The aspect concerning pesticides has now included that the National Academy of Sciences, which came out with a very important study a couple of years ago talking about the special vulnerability of children to these pesticides. Well, nothing seems to happen suddenly in politics. It's a long, slow process towards getting some real change made. But yes, I'm very optimistic about the public and the people's ability to organize and express a concern about the policies that we have and to get some changes made. And we certainly saw that very directly here on local level in Louisiana. It did take us some years. We worked on this for getting a good state pesticide bill passed. We worked on it for 4 or 5 years, actually. It went before the session, the legislative session, several times before we actually got something passed. So we were able to have some direct input in how that legislation was developed and the end result. The way state laws work, you never get the perfect policy, but we do have much stronger regulations here in the state now, better training for our applicators, and we hope to be working with the Department of Agriculture and having some input in how that program operates.
It was shown that while IPM is a team effort, much of the success of the IPM method in St. Tammany schools was due to the pest control contractor who saw the long-term benefits of the less toxic method. Tom Smotherman of Smotherman Exterminating Service, Slidell.
When we bid the contract, it was strictly for a pest control service. But Mr. Semi-Fairley asked me, would I be willing to put a school on a pilot program. A lot of this was at the urging of Dr. Ellen Winchell. And my idea was that it wouldn't be fair to put a new school like Bunny E. Cole on a pilot program without also trying one of the older schools like Brock Elementary. So I suggested that we try 2 schools, an old school and a new school. And we did that for a year.
Was this something new to you? Had you used these techniques before?
On the scale of the school system, or even those 2 schools, we have always been very conscious of chemicals, and we've always tried to use as little chemical as possible. From one thing for the health benefits, the safety, and plus the cost of chemicals. You don't want to just go out and throw them around when you don't need to.
Right.
And we've always been very conscious. I've had children of my own. I've got a grandchild, and I certainly don't want to do nothing in somebody else's house, or especially in the schools, that I wouldn't do in my own house. And I don't use chemicals. I use them sparingly in my house. It has to be a team effort, and as you know, our program has been called a success so far. Our program has been recognized more out of the state and other parts of the state than it is within the parish. And the reason our program has been as successful as it has been due to the teamwork. I usually just report to Mr. Semi-Fairley or either his secretary, Kim Taylor. And Mr. Fairley is very supportive of our program. And I know that when we talk to him, he goes to Mr. Tanner or Mr. Monteleon, and they support our program. The schools have really accepted our program. There's too many principals for me to mention, but just some of them off the top of my head is Miss Cynthia Russell over at Pineview. Miss Allums down at Mandeville Elementary. Scotty Koolman over at Bunny E. Cole. Most all of the principals have worked with us. We have no problem with anywhere in the system. We do have a couple of schools that when we bid this contract originally, it didn't have any Saturday work on it. But we soon realized their schools in this parish has got something going almost 24 hours a day during the week. So we have had to put some schools on a Saturday schedule, and that's worked out pretty good. We've just gotten a lot of support. Another thing that has made this program such a success is the fact that the schools are so clean. It surprised me when I went in. It really surprised me. In the school system right now, we have the schools in good shape. The schools are in good shape. They're in better shape today than they were a few years ago when there was a lot of chemicals being used in the schools. The only problem we're having today, basically, is the pharaoh ants, which is not just in the schools, they're all over the parish and other parishes also. Dr. Allums had asked me, back in the spring, she was having a little problem around a little garden the children were planting around a flagpole. And the ants kept getting bit and stung, and she asked me about trying something, and we couldn't put chemical in there because the children were going to be digging in the dirt and getting their hands in the dirt. So there's two new things on the market. Well, they've been on the market now for 4 or 5 years. It's a biological control. It's, one of them is a nematode, and the other one is a mite. And Dr. Winchell had proved to me at her house that she had used the mites and got good results. And so we also were able to get a hold of the nematode. We tried them, and where we used them, they actually work. They're slow. You know, you can't go there and treat them now and they all be gone tomorrow. It's going to take a couple of weeks for the nematode to attack the ants or the larva stage of the ant and actually kill that larva stage, and then the rest of your ants are going to die off.
How long have you been in the pest control business, sir?
Oh, more years than I care to remember. About 28, 29 years.
29 years. Have you seen that much information coming down from your trade associations, other pest control operators about IPM?
Just recently, our association, the Louisiana Pest Control Association, they have recognized the St. Tammany. In fact, one of the school board members,
Miss Young? Patty Young?
Patty Young, yeah. I'm sorry, Miss Patty Young. You know, she was invited over to make a presentation at the last convention over in Baton Rouge. And it's going to be hard to be accepted in the industry because a lot of our industry, especially the associations, they're kind of supported by the chemical companies. So you're going to have a fight with the chemical companies. You know, that's to be expected. They're not going to turn loose real easy. That's cutting into their pocketbook. And but it's the coming thing. I think that before too long it will be mandated probably. In fact, there are already some guidelines put down. Even Louisiana has put some strict guidelines down in the last couple of years. Yes, this is some of the things that we use in the program. We use a lot of different things, but this is a little glue board, it can be used actually as a mouse board to catch a mouse, or it can be used as a monitoring board. We also have the smaller, which is actually an insect monitoring board. These little boards are made with a glue pad under the bottom where you can stick them up or stick them behind something, or we use a lot of them above the doors around the cafeterias because for some reason the German roach always likes to go to that top hinge of that door. And usually when you're cleaning the building out, that would be the last place you will find that German roach. So we do use a lot of these around the top of the doors.
Now, how do those work?
Well, these, I didn't pull them off because they get kind of messy. You just pull the paper off, exposes the glue. If you want to glue it up, you pull the backing off on the back, and it actually glues up. I mean, you can stick it under a cabinet or up on the wall. Put it in the way you want to. It closes up to make it look good, and so that you don't see the bug when he gets on there without getting up and actually looking at it. This one basically is the same thing. It's just larger. also these boards, you could just take the back end off and use it as a glue board by laying it down flat. We use a lot of those. Primarily, we use them that way for mice. This is a little gadget for mice, which we don't use very much in the school because this is actually to put tracking powder in. The mice would go in one end, get the powder on his feet, lick his feet, and it would actually kill the mouse. We don't use this in the schools simply because we're afraid the mouse may crawl out the other end and track some of that across something that a child may eventually get a hold of. Mm-hmm. They're good to work around warehouses, things where there's no food. The other glue boards that we use, and these glue boards, see, this is what makes an IPM program expensive. These little rascals cost 45, 50 cents a piece. Mm. And we use a bundle around this school. That's what we call migrating chemicals. We use none of those chemicals in the school. Mm-hmm. So we can't afford to put them, in the closet of the lunchroom and the chemical migrate out on the dishes of the food. So mm-hmm. we don't use those type chemicals. Another good IPM tool is steel wool.
Now, how do you use that?
Well, steel wool, that's used just to temporarily stop up holes that we think a mouse may be coming in. Another, we don't have time to talk about everything that's made this program a success. One of the things that has made our program such a success is that when I see a situation, I call Mr. Farley, and the maintenance department is out there the next day. I mean, we have no problem getting what we feel like needs to be corrected. If it's a hole where a rat has eaten a hole before, or just a crack that was accidentally left there. Maintenance is great. They have really helped us, and there's no further way than just calling Mr. Farley. Mm-hmm. The only drawback to the program is it's labor intense. Mm-hmm. That is the drawback, and you pretty well have to know the habits of whatever you're after. You got to, you know pretty well when you walk in one of these schools, you know where the problem's going to be. We're getting the thing down now to where we're all working together, and it is working. It's just we get remarkable support from everybody. We have no quarrel with anybody in this system because we try to work with them. To start with, sometimes I'd get a little aggravated when somebody would start hollering, I got a bad problem, and after you talk to them a few minutes, they said, oh yeah, I saw one, and in a system as big as a school system, as many supplies as brought in, you or anybody is occasionally you're going to have a problem. We've got our chemicals, we figure, from going back over old invoices and our own invoices for the first year and the second year. We feel like we have cut the chemical at least 95%. Now, an IPM program, when IPM was first talked about, they say that you had to have a level of tolerance. Well, we don't really have much tolerance here because if one of these teachers sees something, they start hollering, So we don't tolerate a whole lot of problems. In addition to education of the school personnel, we'll be starting to work with some PTA organizations. In fact, I think Mr. Farley is working on a program now that maybe he can actually send some information to the parents to kind of explain the program. And when the children bring their lunches, they need to be in Ziploc bags, them that the tiger can't smell the steak in, because these ants can't smell what's in that bag and come after. Because you know yourself, right now you couldn't find an ant in this office, but you lay a piece of candy down over there somewhere, in 30 minutes you're going to probably have an ant on it. You go into a home and you got to worry about maybe 3, 4 people. You go into one of these schools, you got to worry about hundreds.
When you started the IPM program, there wasn't a whole lot to go on. There wasn't any books or anything to tell you exactly step by step. How did you launch the program?
Basically, just using our knowledge of how you got to understand a pest. You got to think like a rat. You got to think like a roach. Mm-hmm. In the business, 27 years, you pretty well figure out. I pretty well. Somebody can tell me over the telephone basically what kind of problem, and I know right where to go and take care of that problem and how to take care of that problem. This all comes with time. Our aim is to do the best job possible, and our ultimate aim, which I had hoped to have achieved before this last July, which we didn't, our aim is to make these schools completely chemical free. That's our aim. We've got it about as close as we can possibly get it without some other things happening, and that is the food in the classrooms, eating in the classrooms, and this is not bad at all if you take that extra minute to clean it up before you leave.
The results after 2 years?
A lot of people had gone back and checked once we started posting our pesticide treatment dates back when we were still spraying, and they had gone back and correlated children's asthma attacks and various respiratory ills with dates of treatment, and in many cases they did correspond directly. So there was very positive feedback from parents who were involved in that respect. I haven't had calls about people complaining about cockroaches or many of the other pests, which were initially the main concern when we tried to introduce IPM. The very first question out of every audience was always, well, what are you going to do about cockroaches? And since we've implemented IPM, literally I haven't heard one single complaint about cockroaches.
We moved about 5 years ago, come this Christmas time, from San Diego to St. Tammany Parish. Our oldest child, who was 5 at the time, had begun kindergarten in California, and she has cystic fibrosis. When we moved to St. Tammany Parish and she started kindergarten, the last half of her kindergarten year here, her lung function test, pulmonary function test began to decrease, and at the first we didn't relate it to the school system. It didn't dawn on us that it was having anything to do with the school or really the environment here. We just thought it was a normal part of her life that we were going to have to endure. And after a couple of years, we found out about the pesticides being sprayed in the school, and at the time when they changed over to the new system, using the organic, non-toxic type pesticides, at the same time, her lung function test began to improve and get better, which at that point in time was when we realized that was having an effect on her life, and it was very important to us.
So you were actually monitoring her condition. You were actually monitoring her condition,
Yes.
and noticed an improvement when
Every
they
90
switched.
days, at the time she was being seen at Tulane Medical Center. There's a clinic down there that sees quite a few cystic fibrosis children, and every 90 days she has these tests run. So we know at least 4 times a year, 4 or 5 times a year, the lung capacity and quite a few other different things that they measure with their lungs. They do that, and we were able to see that the lung function was going down, which is not good, obviously, especially for small children. And at about the time when the pesticides changed, we noticed the increase in her lung function. They reversed themselves, and she started doing a little bit better. And again, we didn't really think of it at the time until after they'd started to get better. Their lungs, the lung capacity and volume and whatnot started to increase and get better, that we realized and become a little more knowledgeable of what was going on in the area as well. Some of the other people we talked to, we'd found out that pesticides were being sprayed during the daytime while children are at recess, and the kids go right back into the classrooms right afterwards. And things like that were happening, and that I think a lot of that combined to affect her to some degree.
Is it something that every parent should check into the pesticides used in schools and in their home and in other places where their children go?
Absolutely. I mean, the parents have got to do that. I mean, you wouldn't take a can of roach spray and go spray your baby's crib with it, and then half an hour later put the baby to bed in there. Why would you allow that to happen in the schools? And that's what was happening. That's exactly what was happening.
If you could talk to a parent in a county where the IPM system was not being used in schools, would you encourage them to look into it and to organize and perhaps pursue getting one in their own public school system?
Absolutely. I think Louisiana should go statewide with it. It's cost efficient. It doesn't hurt the kids. There's no reason to not use it.
Parents need to investigate, find out who is spraying the schools, what they're using, how often, when during the day or during the week are they spraying the chemicals and what possible effects it's going to have on the children. And if there's anything that they don't like, take action. Go to the school board, go to the state, whatever they have to do.
Integrated pest management is a system that sort of has to be custom designed for each school system. How does it fit here in with the St. Tammany system?
In St. Tammany, the IPM program is a common sense approach to controlling pests with the least possible use of chemicals. By taking some preventative measures, such as eliminating clutter, maintaining facility cleanliness, removing food and water sources for pests, and eliminating the entryways for pests, as well as using as many non-chemical traps as are available to us, we've greatly reduced the amount of chemicals we're using in schools. At the same time, we're maintaining a low tolerance for pests. We recognize the potential health risks of exposure to pesticides, and for that reason, we've asked that our pest control contractor use chemicals only when these other measures have not been successful. And even then, when treatment is required, it's done at times when students are not present, and the scheduled visits by the contractor are posted. Now, we are 95% chemical-free in our school system. Our goal, of course, is to increase that number more so that we're 100% chemical-free throughout the system.
Some say that the IPM system is kind of expensive to start off with. What was the experience here in St. Tammany about the cost?
Well, cost is often cited as a reason to question the cost effectiveness or the practicality of using IPMs, but in our experience, IPM can be used with little or no increase in cost for treatment. In fact, we've reduced the cost of treatment in our system.
You've been under the IPM system now for 2 or 3 years. What do you contribute the success of the method here in St. Tammany Parish? Is there anything that stands out in particular?
We believe our success has depended on education and teamwork within the system. Providing adequate information about IPM to school administrators, teachers, all school employees, to maintenance workers, parents, students, and of course the pest control contractor is very important. Beginning early with program planning and then through implementation of the program. Communication and cooperation among all these groups are essential. We believe that through continuing communication, we in St. Tammany will be able to have even greater success with the program than we've already had. Providing a healthy, safe, learning and working environment is a primary goal of this school system. Integrated pest management is one way we can work to help ensure well-being for our students and our employees. So we have a very great incentive in making this program work.
Since it has worked so well here in St. Tammany, have you been getting calls from other school systems throughout the state to perhaps get your help?
Yes, we have. We've had a number of calls from other school systems, and of course we're only too happy to share information that we have. Apparently there is great interest throughout, and of course with the state of Louisiana having adopted legislation governing the use of pesticides in schools, all school systems in Louisiana are very interested in this system.
Many of your employees are environmentally aware of the possible hazards of pesticides. How have they responded to the switch to IPM?
Very well. Our employees are very well informed about the ecology of pesticides, and they're concerned for their students and for their own well-being, and of course we are too. We believe we'll get even greater cooperation with our teachers and with other school employees and with the general public through continuing education and through continued communication.
According to the Environmental Protection Agency, IPM is an effective and environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. IPM considers the cost, benefits, and impacts on health and the environment, and then identifies the most suitable way to control pests. Options include elimination of favorable habitats, monitoring the presence of pests, mechanical trapping devices, natural predators, biological pesticides, and, if appropriate, chemical pesticides. The goal is to get the best long-term results with the least disruption of the environment. St. Tammany Parish schools were not the first to use the least toxic method of pest control in an effort to reduce children's exposure to pesticides. But it has become a model for the way parents worked with school administrators to make a change for the better, a change to reduce our dependence upon poison.